In this video, we'll take a look at the Profiler tool. The Profiler is a tool built into the runtime system that allows you to see where your program spends time and which functions call which functions. The Profiler is intended to help you identify pieces of your program that are running slower than expected. To run the Profiler from Studio, choose the Execute with Profiler instead of the standard Execute option. At the command line, you can use fglrun with a -p flag to run the Profiler on the named program. Here we'll run this program by executing it with the Profiler. And I'll just work within the program. And when I quit, the Profiler information is sent to the standard error, which is the output panel here in Studio. Now the Profiler provides two reports. The first one is called Flat Profile. This contains the list of functions called while the program was running. It is shown in a 5-column table. The count column indicates the number of calls for the function. %total indicates the time spent in the function, including the time spent in subroutines that were called from this function. %child is the time spent in the functions called from this function, and %self is the percentage of time spent in this function, not including time spent in subroutines called from it. And then last you have the function name. You'll notice that the functions listed are internal routines that are prefixed with the RTS, as well as other functions, internal functions, as well as methods, and as well as functions written in the program itself. 100% indicates the total percentage of the program execution time. If we look at an example here of order select, we can see that the count, again, indicates the number of calls for this function, so it was called 2 times. It was called 2.1% of the time. That was the total amount of time spent in the routine, including subroutines called from it. And 2% of that time was in subroutines that were called from it, and then the 1%, the 0.1% was the time spent in this function itself. The second report down below is called the call graph. And it provides data on each of the functions that were called. It's represented in a 6-column table. First of all, you have the index, and the index is simply a number assigned to the function. Then there's %total, again the time spent in this function, including time spent in subroutines. %self, the percentage of time spent in this function, not including the time in subroutines. %child, the time spent in functions that were called from this function, and then the calls over the number of calls. So the total number of calls of this function was of this function here, which is the window close internal routine. It was called 2 times, and both times it was called from the main function. So we look at another example down here. We can see here this RTS SQL select function was called a total of 4 times. 3 of those times was from the order fetch function, and 1 of those times from the order new function. And you can see the corresponding time broken out between those 2 functions of the amount of time that was spent once it was called from that particular function. So again, the Profiler is simply a tool built into the runtime system, allowing you to know where your program has spent time and which functions call which functions. Using the Profiler, you can help to identify pieces of your program that are slower than you expect them to be.